mentor that every few months I get to see him and spend time with him and see how he did it. And like we've all had times in our life, because I'm getting people into that state. And I know, as we say, leaders go first, and I needed to lead this conversation. And so I think of, for me, the definition of a leader and people, oftentimes people will now respond to an ad or whatever. There's like this thing and they buy a course and they can do whatever. I would go to a company cold selling salespeople, and they knew I was there to sell them. And so they're negative, they're shut down, they're going to try to heckle me or whatever, use car lots, whatever. And I've got 45 minutes to get them to give me all of their money, overcome all of their objections, and get 4 days of their life, hotel, flights, and everything. And I close hard on the spot.
So I was shocked when I got the notification that Eli Wilde wanted to join my high ticket sales and outbound Facebook community. And of course, I clicked on the profile to make sure it wasn't some fake page, someone pretending to be Eli, and it was actually him, which was freaking awesome. And so when I accepted him into the Facebook group community, I did a post and tagged everyone in the group saying, hey, who would like to see an interview from me and Eli? And I tagged him on the spot to give value to the community. And Eli responded and said, let's do it. So I was super pumped and excited. The night that we actually had the interview on Zoom was supposed to be training with my mastermind students that I coach in sales and outbound and appointment setting and fun things like that in my Virtual Closing Institute community. So I just told them all, hey guys, no live training tonight. Be on Zoom with me and Eli. Just be there in the background, be present, because he's going to drop some amazing gold nuggets. If you guys do not know who Eli is, this man was literally mentored by Tony Robbins himself. He was Tony Robbins' top sales rep and picked up a thing or two when it comes to influence and NLP. So he was dropping huge gold nuggets during this interview. And you're going to see in the recording of the interview that we go right into it. So when we first hopped on, he started telling his story and was just going. My team's like, hey, you got to record. Didn't get an opportunity to do like an intro and hit live. So I just hit the live stream in the group and then hit record while he was in the middle of it. So you're going to see he's already in the middle of a story whenever we go into it. I hope you get as much value as myself and my students did. By the way, if you are not already in the High Ticket Sales Facebook group community, we do things like live call breakdowns and sales trainings. We play literally live calls that are recorded from people who can go and submit them over to give value to you guys, so you guys can literally hear the calls and get training from it, right? I'll put a link down in the description below so you can check it out and catch any interviews whenever we do this in the Facebook group and any trainings that we have. Hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.
Where quietest kid in school to outselling Jordan Belfort. In between there, having this job selling dental products and sucking, and then eventually getting good. I read a book called Spin Selling, and that was my first real sales book that I read. It's kind of old school now, but I say people, like, it's foundational. Situation, problem, implication, needs, payoff. It's a simple framework that is foundational that anybody should use. We're going to kind of unpack some things to make that more powerful today. Because shortly after I read that book and I got decent, I still couldn't handle certain objections. I still getting through, still didn't connect. I ended up getting cast. And I don't want to go too far into my story, but I'll tell the very quick version of this. I ended up, based on a relationship, my girlfriend, her really good friend, was a top manager in Los Angeles. He was managing Tom Welling, who was Superman on Smallville, Jim Carrey, some pretty big names. We connected. His guy got turned down for the Superman role. He thought I'd be good. So they trained me for 6 months for the role of Superman. And if any of you taken acting classes or anything like that, they do a lot of on-camera work, meaning you have a script. And I know a lot of you have script and languages that you say every day, but they put a camera. You're reading a script often cold, so you don't even know the words until they just hand it to you. And they have a camera on your face. So it's kind of like this. And you can see the uncertainty in somebody's eyes. Like, I'm looking down and you got to deliver. And if you see any uncertainty in the eyes where the person's not there, not only do you need to be able to deliver it with certainty, you need to be able to deliver it where you might have uncertainty on purpose, or you're nervous. And so that picks up every little thing. If you're blinking too much, your voice, it's got to be perfect. And I could see early on, I mean, that's doing the work. And eventually, when you're really good, you see these master level actors that they can just pick something up cold. They look at something, their eyes see the words, they pick up the language, and they can deliver. And it seems like they've done it thousands of times, but it's new information. And they'll have little things that they do, even though that it's new. They pick their beats. They have a rhythm. And if you look at a Brad Pitt or The Rock, a lot of times they're not really that good of quote unquote actors because they're just being themselves. But they can take new information and deliver it in a way that feels authentic and aligned because they've just gotten so good at absorbing information and delivering information in a way that feels connected and emotional. And so I would watch these people, and I ended up not getting the role of Superman, obviously. And I got really curious because I didn't go for it 1,000%. I wasn't 1,000% committed. And I got really curious, like, why do I have still certain insecurities? And I was in my mid 20s, I was 25, 24, 25. And I've grown a lot, obviously, in my life, but I knew that there was more. And I saw other people that were just living life more powerfully and more powerful with their communication, more powerful in their asking. And I saw people that would be great with girls or great with money, great with owning businesses. And there's, of course, in sales, there's people that say, follow up 100 times, be committed and just follow up and follow up. But I saw other people, they would say a lot less than I did. And they might ask once. But they asked once very powerfully. And so it wasn't just that people responded to what was said, they responded to the individual. And I was like, well, I could memorize a bajillion scripts and sales closes and rebuttals and all of that. But how do I start to become the person? That was the intro into self-development. And around that time, I read a book that all of you have read or should read called Think and Grow Rich. And that book completely changed my life. I saw this really badass speaker. This dude was just awesome. And this guy had worked in the military. He had he was like a bodyguard for 2 American presidents. And this guy had come from shit. And this guy, when he spoke, you were like, man. And he said, every day that you have not mastered the information in this book, it's costing you and your family money. He's like, get this effing book. I got it. And I had the principles all over my wall. I had quotes. I had the self-confidence formula. I had my mission statement. By this day, this year, I'll have this amount of money, which will come to me in various amounts from time to time during the end term. In return for this money, I will give. I'm waiting a plan from infinite intelligence. I was just like, I was in it. And I'd record myself and I'd listen to myself doing this. I was just super focused on it. And I had certain success, but I still had certain insecurities. And I wasn't fully embodied at the level that I wanted to be. And so I wanted to go even deeper. And I ended up seeing around that time this like almost like a little newspaper thing. And there was a guy speaking at this event, this success seminar that I had heard about called Tony Robbins. Before I even heard of Tony, I was talking to a friend, worked at Trader Joe's, this dude, we ride motorcycles together on the weekend. And I talked to him about some of my study of NLP. I said, I found this thing online called NLP. I'm reading all these blog posts and it's really helping me out. And he's like, well, you got to check out Tony Robbins. I was like, who's Tony Robbins? And he's like, you haven't heard of Tony Robbins? I was like, no, who's Tony Robbins? He's like, you haven't heard of Tony Robbins? I was like, no. So this is like 2004. And a week later, it just happened to be, I see this thing, Tony Robbins' face. I get the book, Unlimited Power. And it talked about the emotions behind the principles, thinking which was the principles, decisiveness, persistence, but he talked about the emotions that drive us and our patterns and how do we condition ourselves mentally and emotionally to become bigger than our obstacles. And so I was like obsessed. I went on to eBay. I got Tony's cassette tapes for $7.90. I got his Get the Edge $300 program for like $60. And I just listened to this stuff like crazy nonstop for a week. And then he was going to be at this Learning Annex event. It was a big seminar, almost 40,000 people. Donald Trump, Robert Kiyosaki, Susie Orman, no money down real estate person, kind of cheesy. I knew it was going to be a pump up kind of pitch fest. They get you all excited and they try to sell you a bunch of shit in the back of the room. But I was like, I'm going to go. It was $100, which was a stretch for me. And I went and all these people kind of doing their thing. And I was like, this is kind of whatever. It's kind of a dead crowd. It was just whatever. But then Tony comes out. He was supposed to speak for 2 hours. He spoke for 4.5, and this dude lit it up. And at the end of the 4.5 hours, he says, look, if you got anything for these 4 hours, spend 4 days with me. I'll change your fucking life or give you your fucking money back. Sign up for this fucking event. And he was so certain and he was so connected and he did all these things in the audience. I used my rent money and I signed up for his event, to Unleash the Power Within. And he talked about some principles at that event. Proximity is power. He talked about who you surround yourself with is who you become, getting yourself in the environment. And he talked about the ultimate success formula, know what you want, why you want it, and keep on changing your approach. And I remember at that event on the very first day, he talked about that book, Think and Grow Rich, that had changed my life. But I remember like not really feeling like, just like in a lot of areas of my life, I had the information, but I wasn't fully applying and living the principles fully. And he talked about the transformation he went through and how that opened up his journey as well for self-development. I had my book bag that day. We had a short break for lunch. I was really broke. So I had my 2 cans of tuna in my backpack. And these girls asked me to go to lunch with them, but I was like, no, I'm good. And I was eating my 2 cans of tuna, and inside that backpack was Think and Grow Rich. And that book, Think and Grow Rich, is there. I open it up as I'm eating my tuna, and I reread the first story in that book about a man named Edward C. Barnes. It's the chapter on desire, where Edward C. Barnes is a bum living in railway cars in Orange, New Jersey. And he hears about a man who's changing the world with his ideas and his mind, a guy named Thomas Edison. And he wrote down that he was going to be partners with Thomas Edison. And it took him 3 years. And the first chapter is all about the story of how he made that happen. I sit there and I write down in my workbook, I'm going to be partners with Tony Robbins. And so I put together this whole plan in my head, and I made some connections at the event. I get the right people. I go to the event. I do the whole thing, and it's transformational. And I started calling the company after Tony's event. I called Tony's company over 200 times in a period of 2 weeks, but I wasn't a pest. I was funny. I got people's names. I remembered people. I sent gifts. I did everything I could. And I didn't have any money at the time, but Tony talked about like our state and our ability to influence people. So that I could make money, I was living on the back part of Santa Monica. All of Santa Monica is really nice now, but it wasn't that nice back then. And so I'm living on the back part of Santa Monica, Cloverfield and 26th Street. There's a park called Cloverfield Park by the small mini airport. If you guys are familiar with Santa Monica, California. And I put up flyers all around the park after the event so I could make some money. I started my first company called Gymless Fitness. I did group exercise classes in a park for donation only. And I made about $2,000 in a period of 2 weeks. And I was like, I am the richest person in the world. I can do anything. And I knew that it was my ability. I was in really good shape. I was a fitness model and I wasn't eating very much. So I was lean and I was funny and I'd engage people. I'd walk around with old ladies, grab their hand, make them laugh. And we do stretching and stuff in the park. And I would make some money. And I remember taking that energy and that excitement and that certainty and that ability to connect and move people emotionally into my conversations. And I started to develop this thing. I harassed Tony's company, and within 2 weeks, I get an interview. They have me drive down to San Diego, doing my affirmations, my incantations the whole way down there. And I meet the vice president of sales. He gives me a script that's 28 pages. It's a 45-minute presentation you have to do in front of everybody. He says, come back in 2 weeks. Don't fuck up one word. Deliver this. I do it. I kill it. And I get the job. And before I know it, I'm on the road with Tony's crew. And Tony's not there. It's just a bunch of salespeople. They drop us off in Colorado, New York, Philadelphia, Miami, like Los Angeles, all these different cities for a period of a couple months. And we would go in cold to companies, door knock. And I would speak to sales-based organizations, real estate, insurance, whatever. And I would try to get an opportunity to speak at their sales meetings where I would train on 45 minutes, deliver my presentation, and then sell them into Tony Robbins' event. This is the same exact job that Tony had for Jim Rohn. So Tony at 17 worked for Jim Rohn. He did it, killed it, and was the top person there. And Jim became his mentor. Eventually, Tony became my mentor. So that's kind of the lineage. I get this job and it's tough. And I'm the low man on the totem pole. So I have all the shittiest meetings, used car lots. Like nobody's ever read a book on self-development in their life. And it's really, really hard. And, in the world of self-development, and online coaching right now, you can post on social media and get some leads. You can go on LinkedIn, Facebook. I mean, there's email. This is like before all of that stuff. So I'm like driving around. I'm up all night going through the yellow pages, looking for like places that I can prospect and knock on their door and get door slammed in my face the next day, begging people, following up like crazy so that I get the opportunity to speak and try to close. And it was like the worst meetings. And the company, of course, was supposed to book you meetings, but they never did. And especially if you're the new person, you don't. And so I got around the top people in the company, figured out what they were doing, and I just worked more than anybody else. And I got really, really lucky in the fact that after a year in the company, Tony's son wanted to be a speaker. Tony said to his son, he says, it's one thing to be a speech maker and do speeches. It's another thing to be a person of influence, because you can speak and people are actually pretty nice. They'll give you a clap and they'll tell you did a good job. But you only know if you're good for one reason. People vote with their dollars. If you're actually valuable and what you've said is valuable, and they see value in you and what you say, they vote with their dollars. And if you're not getting money at the end of your conversations, you've just not been valuable enough. It's not your offer. It's not what you have to say. It's who you are. And so he said that there's only one way to train in this. You need to go out there and start speaking and have people giving you feedback with their money. And you'll know very quickly if you are good or not. And so Tony said to his son, he says, well, you need to live with the top sales guy, whoever that is. And at that point, I had done pretty good. I wasn't quite the top salesperson yet, but also around that same time, Tony's brother-in-law, Scott Humphrey, who now pretty much runs the company, was looking at working in inside sales for the company, for Tony's company. And he wanted to do a ride along with all the different salespeople. And he did this. And Scott Humphrey, by the way, a fierce guy. He has a gold and silver medal from Team Canada as the alternate goalie for the Olympics. So he went to the Olympics twice as a gold and silver medal. So he's badass. And he sees all the speakers work and do the presentations in Tony's company. And he sees all of them, sees the top guys, and then he sees me. And he says to Tony, to Jarek, to Tony's wife, so his sister, Tony's wife, because it's his brother-in-law, he says, you have this dude, Eli. I had the shittiest meetings, but also just like Tony, because Tony said this, there'd be shitty meetings 2 hours away and nobody want to run them. I like, give me those fucking meetings. I'll do it because I want the reps. And Scott came to my meeting and he was like, you have this dude. Like I would go in there and initially, and this was very immature of me, because I had these shitty meetings, used car lots, whatever. I had people that were very resistant. And if people gave me any flack, initially, early on, when I was very immature, I could destroy somebody if they tried to help them or anything. And I could make somebody feel really bad and I could destroy them psychologically. But I realized also they didn't buy. And Tony said this to me one time when he was coaching me. He says, and this is a quote from Mother Teresa, he says, all communication is a loving response or a cry for help. Initially, my belief was, and this is for each one of you that are getting resistance in your cold calling, there's an emotion that's driving that behavior. Nobody is born angry and frustrated. There's things in their environment. And so initially my immaturity said, well, fuck those people. But then as I got more mature, I said, you know what? Those people need this the most. And if I can connect to these people and see behind the frustration, there's something driving that. And so I matured a lot very quickly. But initially I was just trying to be badass and show people that I was boss. And that was my own insecurity, because it didn't end up in sales, but I would end up, quote unquote, winning the conversation, but losing the sales. So ultimately we all lost, which sucked. Around this time, it's been 1 year in the company, and I'm now living with Tony's son and brother-in-law. Tony didn't want to do live trainings anymore until 2008 happened. So Tony had this whole plan called TNT, Tony Not There. It was all going to be digital delivery events. You essentially went to a movie theater and you saw Tony's main event, but Tony on a movie screen, and coaches facilitating all of the transformational stuff that Tony would do. No firewalk, but we did a board break. So that was the future of the company. And Tony put together a all hands meeting for the salespeople and the coaches in the company. And he said, this is the future of the company. I'm segueing out of live events. Here's the comp plan. Here's the structure. Here's what it looks like. It was a 2-day training with Tony breaking down all of this for us. And at the end of it, he's talking about his future. And he says, I want you to know something. If you're in this room right now, I need you. This is the future. He says, if you're in this room right now, and he looks right at me, he says, you're my partner. I went home that night. It was 1 year later to the day. since I wrote down I'd be partners with Tony Robbins. And
1 year to the day. Wow.
1 year to the day. And so I'm, doing these events, and because around, 2008, all that stuff happened, Tony had to come back for the company. Very long story short, he started doing them again, but it was different. He was only doing about half the events, which still he does less than half the events now. But that's when I really started to get good, especially being the fact that even though I was very good, I was living with Tony's son, and they would call out. We had a call center that would call all the companies in the area. So we're living in Los Angeles and New York. They'd say, hey, we have two amazing speakers in your area. One's this guy, Eli. The other is Tony Robbins' son. Who do you want? And everybody wanted Tony's son. So again, I got the shitty meetings. But because I was met with that resistance, so a lot of you are cold calling or you're on quote unquote not good offers, that's the opportunity to get really good. So you have to create an empowering meeting. And that's where I really started to dig into the psychology of what people do. And at this point, I'd seen Tony Robbins at those big events a bajillion times. And I remember specifically one day I'm sitting there and I'm taking down those like crazy, watching this guy's, his eye movements, his body language, his stuff, the questions that he would ask. And we weren't supposed to, but I would transcribe. I would record everything on like a little recording device, and I'd go home and I'd hit play, stop, and I would transcribe with me typing on my computer, not like Otter or Rev. I would type hours and hours and hours and hours of everything this man would say. And I would print up transcriptions that I would type of what he said. And I would highlight in like a pink highlighter, every question that he would ask. And I started to look for patterns. And I remember specifically as I was going through, I would specifically look at how he would open, how he would segue into a close, and how he would do those interventions where it's completely unscripted, where he's just dealing with somebody's shit. And I remember specifically, he's turning around a suicide one day. And I was going through it, looking at the patterns and his questions, different ones. And I had this light bulb moment where I said, man, if he can use these distinctions and frameworks that I'm developing here, that I'm beginning to understand, if he can use that to turn around suicides, I can certainly use these frameworks to get somebody to turn around their objection. And that's when I developed this process we now call transformational selling. I studied all the NLP, all the advanced linguistics, and I got to interact with Tony a lot. He took me to Fiji for a week. I, have his cell phone. We don't hang out on the weekend and drink beers, but if I send him a message right now, he'd respond right back. And I would ask him specific questions about objections and why I got resistance. And I thought he was going to give me some kind of rebuttal, like say this, but it was always some like mind-blowing answer related to how I'm being and what I'm not seeing in the moment. And specifically in one of these interactions that I had with Tony, I asked him some questions and he gave me this definition of influence that was so powerful. I transcribed what he said, and I read it out loud before every single one of my presentations. This one thing that he said, I know has helped me sell tens of thousands of prospects and put millions of dollars in my pocket. This one thing that he said was such a catalyst for me to really understand what we call transformational selling. And I can tell you exactly what he said. Would you like to know what he said?
Of course.
He said to influence someone, you must be connected to that person. You can't only understand them intellectually, because you can understand them and judge them. By the way, you can never influence somebody if they feel judged by you. You must connect to them, their needs, their wants, their desires, their fears. You got to step into their world without buying into their story. That's the unique balance, to step into somebody's world and appreciate them, but not buy into their limitation. They've already done that to themselves. If you buy into their limitation as to why they can't buy your offer, you've added no value to their life. The added value you offer representing me and our potential partnership with these clients and customers is that we don't buy into their limitation. I don't buy into the limitation of how fucking long they can go without food, how late they can stay up, how fucking hard they can clap, or what they can achieve or have the capacity to feel and do in their life. And because I don't buy into those limitations, because I see more for them, and because I'm willing to go there first, I can influence them. And I unpacked that and I thought about that, like there's a lot there that allows him to be that person because he's willing to go there first. to lead, not anybody to ask anybody to do something that he's not willing to do. So for me, I just constantly started taking on bigger opportunities. Like I wanted to, of course, make more money. I wanted to be number one, all of that. But as we always say, we need to have a mission that's bigger than our fears and our excuses. And we need to have that for ourselves as influencers and as salespeople if we're leading somebody to really step into that vision for themselves. So I always wanted to have that for myself. And for me, of course, I wanted to make money. Of course, I wanted to be number one. But if I had never met Tony Robbins, who he was to me, because I had an experience of him, I had an experience at his event that shifted things in my life. My mission became to share that experience with people to better their life. So regardless of whether I met Tony or not, like it wasn't about being a fanboy, any of that stuff. My mission was to expose people to the principles inside of that man, because I believe their life would be better. And so that was my mission, was to expose the world to this man for their reasons. And so that just became my mission. It was like what I wrote down. And I wanted people to have that experience for their life to be better. And so that's what drove me. And so I do believe, and we went through, I studied all the NLP stuff. I spent an ungodly amount of money just finding the best in the world, paying them $2,500 or $5,000 for an hour to ask really smart people, hypnotists, all this different questions and create some frameworks and start to put together different syntaxes. And then I'd ask Tony personally, which would be more money than I could afford, but he would just coach me for free on how he would handle it. And I began to create some of these frameworks because the limitation with NLP, and NLP for everybody that doesn't know, it's neuro, your nervous system, linguistic language programming. NLP, neuro linguistic programming. How do we use language to put thoughts and feelings and states inside of somebody and condition them in a way, program them in a way? Tony said you can't really program somebody, so he called it NAC. He just changed the IP, changed some of the tools. Neuro, nervous system, associative. How do we create new associations? Conditioning. Just like we can condition a muscle, we can condition ourselves. How do we condition somebody to respond unconsciously, neurologically, bypassing their conscious mind by putting thoughts and feelings inside of them, conditioning their physiology, their focus, and their meaning in a way that puts them in what we call the buying state. So I saw some limitations with it because even what Tony was doing and what NLP were doing, it was based in therapy, not based in what I was doing. And so I started taking a lot of these frameworks and putting them into my sales process every day. And I've done on behalf of Tony, I did about 3,400 seminars. I've done well over 4,000 seminars total, a bunch of on my own. I got an event coming up with like Alex Hormozy, Tom Billy. I got a bunch of events coming up where I'm really interested to see what these people do and talk to them and show them kind of how we do some things. And now I coach people also in their events, how to frame, how to present the offer, how to position things uniquely so that it gets people ready to buy. So there's like the concept of working in your sales or on your sales process, on your sales company. And so I've been really fortunate to work with people at every different level. But as I coach anybody, I give them this framework that's really simple. I want everybody here to understand, no matter where you're at in the sales game, we teach that there's 4 levels of influence. The first is how you influence yourself. This is your own congruency, your identity, your beliefs and your values, your capacity to live in alignment and speak from that place. Because 2 people can have the same script, same offer, same everything, but one person will sell more saying the same words having to do with you. So you have a relationship to resistance, you have conditioned states inside of you, and level 1 influence is the foundation. And I always say, for an analogy, the height of the pinnacle is determined by the strength and depth of the foundation. A 2-story building has a very different foundation than a 50-story building. And so how high your building is allowed to go is based upon the depth of the foundation. How high your income and influence will go be based upon the depth of the foundation. This is the basement. This is the stuff that's beneath the surface that nobody else sees. It's your own congruency, values, alignment, and beliefs about who you are. And just like conditioning your muscles to become strong, every single day, your sense of mission and purpose and values must be conditioned. And so when people lean up against you, they get an experience of who you are. And that feeling makes them either feel constricted or safe. And it changes the dynamic of your answers, regardless of the question. You could say, is that having an impact on them? And you could say it in a way with the right tonality where you're just connected and they feel safe, and it'll be a different answer than if you're mumbling and stuttering and don't feel connected to the words.
That's
So you've got to
true. Yeah.
So level of influence is how you influence you. It's the clarity and certainty you have over your own life, your offer, what you do, and who you are. And then level 2 influence is sales, where you take what's inside of you and you transfer that certainty to another person. I always say you can't give that which you don't possess. I can't give you $1 if I don't have $1. And I can't give you confidence and certainty and the capacity to move forward out of your limitation unless I'm doing that for myself. So I transfer it. Level 3 influence is doing that to a group, managing a company, or speaking to a bunch of people and influencing them. Level 4 influence is where you're able to influence when you're not there. Great example is Steve Jobs. He's been dead like 12 years now, but he's still the most recognizable name in that company because he transferred his mission into people and process so that his mission lives on after he's gone. And that relates to all of us, meaning that someday, yes, we're going to die, but even before we die, if you own a company and want to take a vacation, it's not going to fall apart if your mission and values are instilled in the people and process. If you sell somebody and they go and talk to their spouse or their friend and they want to cancel, it wasn't level 4 influence. So there's things you can do at the end of the call, things inside of the call to kind of psychologically, emotionally box them in to get them the right associations and future pacing that can help them. So that's some context for what I do and a little bit of my journey. A few years ago, I started training all these really big companies, Fortune 100 companies, and I had partnered with the guys over at Traffic and Funnels. We created a program a lot of people saw called Sales Mentor. I became the face of it, and we had about 1,500 to 2,000 people, salespeople a month going through my program. Outside of that, I was training big companies, so I had about 250,000 people go through my sales training process in a couple of years and really liked it. And I talked about some of the aspects beyond just scripting, which I think is important. But some of the other aspects about why people do what they do, people found it really valuable. And so we broke off a few years ago, started our own kind of sales training company, really small, and, speaking stuff, just everything influence, and even have a podcast now, everything's influence. So just really into all the things that make somebody do what they do, and buy what they buy, and figuring out frameworks on how to bypass the resistance and put people in what we call the buying state. There's a state of mind. Yeah. It's like, each one of us have gone to a store where we didn't need to buy anything, but we just I just feel like buying something. And you've had times where I know I went to a store and I needed to buy something. And a salesperson asked me a really cheesy question or whatever. Oh, and they said, "Hey, can I help you find something?" Which is a bad question. And I said, "No, thanks. Just looking." And so there's things that we do or say that take people out of the buying state. And there's things that we can do to put them in the state. So what are people actually buying? They're buying states and identities. So there's a state. And so a state, and we all know this. What do people buy? They buy based off logic or emotion. We all know it's emotion. And so there are certain emotions that we want to be able to create in somebody that make them buy. Pain, gain, all of that, trust, all those things. But just as a general example for everybody here, if we take any strong emotion, say anger or depression, and we've all felt those emotions before, in order to feel, say, depression, if we were to take the emotion of depression and unpack it like a recipe, there's certain ingredients. In order to feel depressed, you have to be focused on the past, some significant emotional event. There's a pattern of meaning. You have to make it mean something negative about you, people, yourself, feel a sense of loss, less, never. So there's a pattern of focus, there's a pattern of meaning, and there's a pattern of physiology, your breath, your language that creates. So depression doesn't happen to somebody, they're doing it. They're just unconscious of it. When somebody buys, it's something they're doing internally. So they have a recipe. There's certain ingredients that we can put people into with our questioning and our reframing abilities. And so some of you are asking the right questions, but you don't know why they work when they do work. And so you don't know why they're not working when they're not working because you don't know what to look for. And so as we can see beyond just the script and respond to the person, not their words. So we can see behind the mask. and dig into that and know what to look for, we can begin to move people into these states that compel them to action. Or, and if we don't understand what we're looking for, we make great offers and get objections. And so we have to bypass that with a lot of just an understanding of the framework and what to look for. So that's kind of what we do.
So there's a lot to unpack with that. And it's kind of going through my mind when you were telling your story that I found very interesting, that a lot of people here watching this will definitely get value from. But you went through this period of preparation, right? I mean, and I loved how you kind of put it. And if you're in a position of sales where maybe it's unqualified leads or the offer's just not so great, and you were able to kind of switch your mindset to be like, well, hey, this isn't a good offer. I'm not making money, but this is my time to get so good, right? This is like preparation. And then even before that, before you even were able to go and execute and speak, you spent all these hours preparing and going through the script and practicing over and over and over again. And I feel like what kind of advice would you give to somebody who they say, I want to get good at sales, I want to be the best, but how can they put themselves in that type of state? Because people say it, but they don't really understand how much preparation goes into it, because the preparation phase is just, maybe they're distracted by other things. They just don't have that it factor of focus, right? And you did, right? So something sparked it to where you didn't see it as a hindrance to go and prepare, right? So for those watching that need that preparation and that type of focus, and understand that it's a necessity, because you stacked years of preparation and practice to get to the point where you're making millions. It didn't just happen quickly. And that timeline is what they have to go through. So how can people influence themselves to care enough about the preparation to go through that? Because it's not easy for people to do.
Well, when I had a great mentor that every few months I get to see him and spend time with him and see how he did it. And like, we've all had times in our life, because I'm getting people into that state. And I know, as we say, leaders go first. And I needed to lead this conversation. And so I think of, for me, the definition of a leader. And people, oftentimes people will now respond to an ad or whatever. There's like this thing and they buy a course and they can do whatever. I would go to a company cold selling salespeople, and they knew I was there to sell them. And so they're negative, they're shut down, they're going to try to heckle me or whatever, use car lots, whatever. And I've got 45 minutes to get them to give me all of their money, overcome all of their objections, and get 4 days of their life, hotel, flights, and everything. And I close hard on the spot. So I better be prepared. And I better be prepared linguistically, psychologically, emotionally. And we've all prepared before. We've all done, every single one of you done amazing things. All of you also, me too, have done some really dumb things and been unprepared. And so it's not a matter of capability. Every single one of us is capable to do all of those things and make all of the money and change all of the lives and be the person. But there's one underlining thing that once you embody this, it changes your whole life. It all comes down to one thing: your standards. And the secret to all of this is to raise your standards. And a big part of this is people are always kind of judging you a little bit. It's like they're getting a sense of who you are. And I always tell people there's two ways that we can live our life. One is outside in, the other is inside out. And outside in, the way when I coach salespeople, I say a lot of us are, we're kind of like this cup. And you imagine a cup that's a little bit empty. A lot of people go to their sales calls a bit empty, and they're looking for validation. They're looking for being liked. They're looking for something from the outside to fill them up, because there's something missing there. So they're looking to get something that's outside in versus inside out. You're full of confidence and certainty. And when you think of somebody very successful, walk into a room, you might even say they're kind of full of themselves, not egotistical, but full of themselves. And so what are they full of? Confidence, certainty, mission, purpose. Something is like an unlimited resource of energy that's flowing through them that they're aligned with, and they're full of it. And so when I enter into a sales conversation, because of my standards and I do that work, I want to make sure that I'm full, and then I can fill other people's cup with the overflow. And so I want to be full. And so at the end of my presentation, people say, Eli, that's the biggest piece of shit in the world. I hate you. I want to punch you in the face. And they're really mean. It's like they're trying to take something out of my cup, but it's overflowing. And so I'm not here for your validation. I'm here for something bigger. And people get a sense of that. But also if somebody gives me a compliment and say, Eli, you're the best, you're amazing, best I've ever heard. It's like they're trying to put something in my cup, giving me a compliment. Also, it doesn't mean nothing to me. It pretty much means nothing to me. It means something about who that person. So I appreciate that person. It says something to me about you because I'm aligned regardless of your opinion. And so like a dog getting a bone, I get smacked or I get a bone. And so what gets rewarded gets repeated, and my life starts to go in a direction based on outside circumstances and other people's opinion, whether they're good or not. I need to be connected to something, mission and purpose that's there, irregardless of you. And I show you what's possible so I can take you somewhere. And so because of that, I show up in a way where regardless of the resistance, I'm connected. And I know the syntax. We have a 6 call framework, a 6-stage framework for our call, just like learning how to dance. I know the next step. And if I'm dancing with a partner who's stumbling on their feet or trying to throw off my rhythm, I know how to go back and correct that. And so I know how to deal with that and then move them strongly to the next step. Will it always work? No. But more times than not, it will. And you start to notice as you review your own calls where you missed a step or what you didn't notice before, how you could have pre-handled something. So you do this, tens of thousands of times, you begin to notice some patterns. And so I got really good at extracting those patterns. And I always do this analogy in my presentations. I say, imagine this is the moon and this is the earth. If the earth got bigger, the moon would get closer. It's physics. But if the earth was to shrink, the moon would get repulsed. It's physics. Whatever has the largest mass will create that. And it's the same way with your certainty, your belief, a feeling of certainty in yourself, who you are, what you do. And when you have that and your prospect says, I got to think about it. I got to talk to my spouse. I can give you the right language of what to say. And when I started training sales teams, they'd say, hey, I get this objection. What do I say? And I'd say this. Here's what I'd say. Here's a video of me doing it and saying it. And they'd say, okay, I'm going to do that. And they would say it and they wouldn't get the same response. And they say, well, I tried that and it didn't work. I said, well, let me listen to the call. And I'd say, you did not freaking say what I said. You said my words, but you did not say what I said. And they, what do you mean? And so this is the earth, this is the moon. They would get that resistance. So this is the prospect, this is you. Prospect says, I got to think about it. And they would shrink in their certainty. And they would say the words, well, can I ask you a question? Do you mind? Can I ask you this thing? And they're communicating. Words are only 7% of language. It's physiology, body language, tonality, a warmth, sincerity in the voice, genuine concern. They would say the right words, but with fear, anxiety, stress, and anger and frustration in their voice. And people don't respond to your words. Everything is based off emotion or energy and motion. And so it's the energy, the emotion, not the logic, the emotion that we feel that compels us to do something. And some people speak too fast and they're saying the right words. But as we always know, it's the spaces between the notes that create the music. Otherwise, it's all just noise. And so there's a lot of noise out there in sales, a lot of noise out there happening in marketing, and a lot of these prospects are bombarded with noise. And so how do we create these moments? How do we connect? And after I'd done thousands of presentations, I started asking companies where I'd gone in and I killed it. And sales, that were really difficult, where I turned it around. And I said to them, at what point in our conversation, what point in my presentation did you know that you were going to buy? It was never the offer, wasn't even the objection handler. They knew deep down ahead of that. They were like, it's the moment you said that. It's the moment you asked me that question and really made me think. So I remember this, that I realized there's these magic moments in life for each one of you. If we all were to die tomorrow, you would look back on your life and you'd have certain moments. And there's a pattern for each one of us that create those moments, something unique, something unexpected, something that we thought it was going one way and it went another. Like, what are these moments that make somebody pause and reflect and go internal where something new happens? And for anything to change in our lives, our sales, our business, something new has to come into your life or something new has to come out of you. So how do we do both? How do we present something new, a new perspective for somebody outside of them, but allow something new, a distinction, a thought, a feeling, something new, a different level of depth to come out of that person? How do we facilitate that? And there was these magic moments. And there's, I started to say, well, how do I create more of those? And after doing thousands of presentations and asking my clients, what was the moment? So I found the exact moments and I figured out how to manufacture those moments. And there'd be changes in my tonality and my stories and my framing, different questions that I would ask. And as I got really good, going back to that analogy, say there's the earth and the moon. When they would give resistance, I would expand in my certainty, not shrink. So they were more drawn in. But also the other side of it, I thought, how don't I just expand in my certainty where the earth gets bigger and the moon gets drawn in? But also, how do I make the moon even smaller? How do I shrink their certainty? How do I ask them questions about what they're doing that decrease their certainty in what they're doing? And I make people think, well, what you're doing right now, so your sales process, your marketing, do you think that's the absolute best? Or do you think there might be a better way? Well, it's never perfect. What do you mean by that? So I get them questioning their own process where now they're not as certain in what they're doing. And somebody says, oh, well, I'm making $1 million a year in business. Well, that's great. It sounds like you've had, I guess, a certain level of success, but what do you think has kind of kept you from that next level? Because I'm sure you know that there's other people in the business been doing it for the same time that are making 10 times more than you. What do you think that they're doing that you're not? Because now this guy was like all King Kong, big dick swinging. And now I'm talking about this. So in order for a business to grow, and the cheesy analogy, if something's not growing, it's dying. And I'm not saying your business is dying, but when you think about something really growing fast, so I'm beginning to present this gap even to somebody that's really overconfident. And some people that you're going to have on a call are overconfident, got to push them down. Some people are underconfident. Hey, I'm making $3,000 a month. Someday I wish I could make 4. It's like, well, that's way too small of a goal. What would you like to be making? Because listen, I talk to people every day, not very smart. I talk to some real idiots that are making like $200,000 a month, 22-year-old kids, but they're just doing the work. But first of all, they believe that they could do it. Why don't you believe that this is possible for you? Would you be open to setting a higher goal? Because that's going to be more exciting for me, and so giving them some reasons. So some people need to bump up the goal. Some people I need to smash down their confidence. So you feel into that. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. You're just creating a gap, whether it needs to be widened or you have to bring them up just because it was too low. That's, very powerful. I like how you phrased the question too, and definitely giving them a different perspective. Because essentially what's happening is you're kind of making them go through that identity shift in the call, right? You're kind of like expanding the identity and getting them to go through that shift. And it's widening the gap enough to where they're thinking about it, but it's almost giving them a kind of sense of overwhelm to where you're building value for your service as well, which I really love that. That's huge.
And we call it the trust trinity. People need to trust in me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a language of trust where they believe in me, whether I'm speaking or selling. They need to trust in the process. And there's a lot of good processes out there. Anybody who's read Alex Hormozy's book knows the process. Like there's really good offers and people should have a doubt in process, but there's some elements to it. And there's case study testimonials. We're putting together a VSL right now on a webinar. And I pretty much took there's like the 3 beliefs, external, internal, all vehicle, all that stuff. And then testimonial to reinforce the point. I start my VSL off. I'm like, hey, all the fucking testimonials, you can follow me, you can do this, you can see it. I'm not doing that here, not telling all this shit. I've done $100 million, Tony Mom's personal mentor. I've trained like all these people. I'm just like, hey, here it is. You need all that, go to my page. We got like thousands of testimonials, but I'm cutting all of it out just so I can focus on you. So, which is also different because it's being saturated in the market. People are seeing the perfect webinar, Russell Brunson, all of that. So how do I become unique? And automatically, at least they're thinking like, this is different. And most people don't start something off like that with certainty and connection. And I'll make a joke and I'll be really warm and I'll change my tonality so it's dynamic. Most people are monotone. So you see I'm strong sometimes, like it's superior. Like, listen, what I really respect and admire is because you're all here, I just went inferior. I'm lifting you up. And I think you're a lot like me, equal. We all want to make more money and change the world, but something has to change, doesn't it? I went nudge back superior. So I'm changing my frame, superior, inferior, equal. I'm changing all the time. And there's a cadence change and softening. And even if you listen to people that are really great, and we train on this, the tonality, if you listen to high-powered CEOs, there's like a sage type rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's warrior. 13, 14, 15, 16. And there's lover. 17, 18, 19. Warrior, sage, lover. And so there's different tonalities too, where you learn how to just even evoke different emotions with your tonality alone. And so there's certain moments too where somebody's talking really fast and you go, well, you said something really powerful there. Let me interject here and ask you, I guess just ask you this question, and I'll slow them down. Because again, it's the spaces between the notes that create the music, and the music is inside of them. How do I cultivate and generate those emotions where I got to slow them down a bit? But if I'm really slow and talking really slow the whole time, they're going to be bored. And so do I have some dynamic pillars, we call them, and how we describe the offer. And also when you get really advanced and you explain things, you begin to learn how to use other people's adjectives. And NLP, they talk about different, or disc assessment, people are this or that, but if you're using somebody's language right back to them, they're connected to it because it's their fucking words. And so like, how do we use that? And so you can, if you're starting out, you need to be able to take good notes on your calls. But once you get really good and you recognize the patterns, you realize that it's their emotions. You're dealing with the elements that are there, and you get really good at extracting language and feeding it back, and it makes people feel understood and connected. And if you can link those desired states and values to your product and service, they'll move forward. So the trust trinity is getting people to trust in you, trust in your process. And what I become masterful at, and what I know I'm the best in the world at, is getting people to believe in themselves. And now there's a distinction with that. So even when you hear things like objections, and we're putting out some amazing content we just put out inside of our new course last week, because I'm friends with like all the other sales trainers, Cole Gordon, Jeremy Miner, my buddy Bill Walsh, killing it right now. So I talk to these people every week, and I see what they're doing. I show them what I'm doing, and I've shown them all some things recently where they're just like brains melting. And I have like the top salespeople in the world right now, and their brains melting over these frameworks. And I said, well, because I really got clear a few months ago, I was like, well, because people said, well, how would you handle it? And I would do it. And we started to know some patterns going back through my calls, my videos, all of it. And what Tony Robbins does, and a lot of it's based on conversations I've had with him, watching him to see what he would do. So even when you get objections, there's externals, time, money, other people, spouse, partner, whatever. Those are all externals. Objections, like objects. It's hard for me to move an object that the prospect has put in front of me. I can try to go around it and all that stuff and get them to see it from a different angle. But this objection, there's times where they've overcome it themselves because they were in what we call a resource state. So I can work with the externals, but it's harder. Like say spouse, I'll talk to your spouse. Not really effective. Calendar, like I can't free up time on your calendar, money. I can't just give you extra money, but I can get people into a state of resourcefulness, certain emotional drivers that we put people in to get them touched, moved, and inspired to do it now, urgency, all of that. So the internals are your beliefs, your values, your commitment level. Even like basic framing patterns. Somebody says, I can't afford it. Well, I'm sure your intention isn't just to save a little bit of money. Your intention of why you came to this call is to make sure you've got a real plan to make sure you never have to worry about money again. That's your real intention, isn't it? So off money, your real intention is to make sure that you can support your family. Like you said, that's what you really want, isn't it? But isn't it more important? Hierarchy of values. Isn't it more important that you take some calculated risk? Can I share what the most successful people do? Model the world pattern. So we start to combine all these different frames, meta frame, changing frame size, time jumping, all of it into a sequence that gets people reassociated and begin to access different resources inside of themselves. And we can embed, we can frame, we can do a lot of this. And so we've created some really cool frameworks on this to get people really having a different sense of responsibility. And I love that word, and I define it for my audience a lot. Responsibility means the ability to respond, to empower ourselves to do something despite our external limitations. The opposite of empowering ourselves is paralyzing ourselves, and that's where you're stuck. And so it's a lot of framing. And once people are connected to you and you lead them into this these internal states where they believe in their ability to do something and to be responsible. If we can guide them through the process, ideally you want to have some framing in the beginning of the call or the VSL or whatever before they get on the call, sure they're framed appropriately, bought into you, your offer a bit, and then we can work in that way. So there's a syntax to it. And so we're starting to break that stuff down.
That's awesome. So final gold nugget for everyone tuning in the live stream. I see you guys blowing up the comments. This has been amazing so far. Obviously, everything that you had said, dealing with the objections, saying the right things, it takes a level of confidence and certainty for most people to build up to. Like, it's easy for them to say it in theory, but for them to deliver it and to say it at that moment takes confidence and certainty, right? And I've noticed with a lot of people in sales, building up to that level of confidence, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of repetition. So what would be your best advice for someone to be able to build their own confidence if they're just not at that level of confidence yet? How can somebody take an actionable step, whether it's micro wins or just something to build the confidence to get to that level?
Well, there's a lot of things that you need to do, but I'll give you some tactical stuff and a conceptual thing that might shift your idea around what confidence is, because I could ask every single one of you, are you confident that you can tie your shoes? And you say, yeah. And I'd say, why? You say, well, because I've done it a bajillion times. So repetition of anything can help us. But a lot of you are conditioned to not be confident because you're saying things repeatedly inside of your head that are making you, conditioning you to not be confident. What's wrong with me? Why did that fail? Whatever we focus on expands. So there's really understanding the controlling forces of your mind, submodalities, pictures, tonality, like what's happening inside of you, like taking over the controls inside of your own mind, how you speak to yourself, what you do, doing something every single day that just puts you on the line. And it could be cold showers or push-ups or waking up, morning routine, any of that stuff that can help. But like, I don't do any of that shit anymore. You know, I did for a while, but it's a capacity to believe in yourself, to put yourself on the line every day and have a process of review to make sure that you're constantly getting better. Because when you feel like you're growing, again, like a plant growing or dying, you feel alive. And if you're leaning into the growth and you're more attached to the growth than just getting something, getting the sale, it's like you're an attractive person. So I could go back to that example. Are you confident you could tie your shoes? And you say, yeah, because I've done it a million times. So there's an idea of repetition that helps. But here's the twist. If you feel like you need to do something a million times before you're confident, there's a lot of things you'll never do the first time. Michael Jordan would have somebody come at him in a new way. And he studied the game tape and he did all the things and he was prepared. But regardless, even if you're Michael Jordan or if you're a great race car driver or a poker player, if you're really the best in the world and you're living and you're playing against other people that are the best in the world, there's a lot of things you're going to see for the first time. Say, because you can't prepare for everything externally, but you can be prepared internally to generate a sense of belief and confidence and certainty where you enter into situations for the first time with absolute certainty. So I told people all the time, I was really prepared to handle objections. And I remember like at first I was scared of objections with my audience and all. So I was like, fuck, I need to just focus on these language, these questions, like what to say. And I would train on them over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, over and over again. And I was hungry for those objections. And it's interesting. It's like if you walk down the street and there's an angry dog at the end of the street and you're scared of dogs, the dog's going to come, it's going to smell the fear and it's going to want to attack you. But if you're like, where's that fucking dog? And you're just like, you want that dog? The dog is going to smell the lack of fear and be like, it's not even going to attack you. And because once I wanted those objections and I wanted all that, I'm like, let's fucking dig in. Let's do it. People were scared to give me an objection because I knew I could handle it. Could I always handle it? And I still got stuff, but I was like, let's figure this out. Let's get at it. And I had this like this thing about it. And I wanted that. And I remember one time I got pretty good at the sales thing and good at the speaking thing. And I'm in my flow and I'm doing my presentation and I'm good, not great. And this woman interrupted me middle of my presentation. And it threw me off for a second. And I looked at her and it was kind of rude, but I said, you know what? Thank you. And she made me get present in the moment. I was like, that's what I've been missing. And that's why I wasn't connecting with my audience at a great level, because I wasn't fully present. I'd done the presentation 1,000 times. I'd done the same thing. And it was kind of like going through the motions. And so how do I bring something new to the present, something new out of me and compel something new to have this magic moment, have a magic selling moment where somebody gets into distinction, I got to be present. And it forced me to get present in that moment. And that's where this true transformation occurs, not after the 18th objection handler or script thing that you're reading, but it's a moment of presence. And I wanted to bring that into every second of my communication with these people. I said, not only are they worth it, but I'm worth it. I want to be present with my life. I don't want to just read information. I want to read people. I want to direct them, and I want to lead them in a way that empowers them. And if they can feel that, that's going to be it. So yes, you got to be trained and you got to be hungry. You got to know your stuff and train on it over and over again. If you have a certain sales question, well, that's exactly what this will do for you. Well, that's exactly what this will do for you. Well, that's exactly what this will do for you. Well, that's exactly what this will do for you. Well, that's exactly what this will do for you. So you might just say the same sentence like 100 times, say it over and over again, over and over again, over and over again. There's a very big difference between studying. You read a bunch of shit, watch a bunch of fucking videos, or you train. Train means you do something over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, over and over again. And if you're more trained than the next person, you are going to win. But also you can get into a rhythm like I have where you're kind of bored. And so something new coming out of you every moment where you're present and you want something new and you want a new challenge. And that alone, the fact that you're hungry for it will make a lot of people just submit. But if something new comes up, you're excited to dig into it, not scared. And then you can expand in that moment and there'll be something really magical that happens. So as I said, one thing tactical, be trained, be ready. And the other thing conceptual, presence and ability to connect and to be genuinely excited about that.
Damn. That's awesome. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much, man, for your time and giving value to the group. For those who've been tuning in, make sure you show him some love in the comments. Give us a bunch of thumbs up. We're going to be posting this on YouTube as well. So if you're actually catching this on YouTube, let us know what you thought of his story and his tips on transformation and influence in the comments below as well. Eli, thank you so much for your time and for doing this today. Greatly appreciate you, man. And for everyone watching, hope you guys have a wonderful day and tune in for the next episodes whenever we do these interviews. See you guys.
Appreciate it. Take it. Bye.